All right, listeners, you're listening to Lament of Hope blog and podcast. I'm here today with Anita Tatlow. Many of you may know her from Salt of the Sound, which is um, it's a group. It's very unique in the sense that they use ambient sound, in a worshipful sense, and it's a duo between her and her husband. Um, and Anita's been kind to talk with me today. She's based in Hong Kong. Anita, I kind of want to ask just to get started because I'm so intrigued. Why is the duo called Salt of the Sound? It's a very interesting, unique title.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for asking me to do this. I'm excited for this conversation. And I would say that's the number one question we get asked. And yeah, I think I think this project, and we have several projects now. This was like the first one. We've been doing this for kind of 10 years with Salt of the Sound. When we were thinking of, okay, what's the name of this? How do we communicate what we are trying to do? Which is to create music that's different, music that is a place of provides a place of stillness and rest, but is worshipful. And so we were trying to communicate all of these things in a duo name, and we didn't just want to be Anita and Ben, because that doesn't kind of say everything that it needed to say.
Yeah.
And it was really the verse that says, "You are the salt of the earth." And we thought, well, salt of the sound is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to be the salt of the earth through the music that we create. And so that was well,
Hmm.
it's and people are really intrigued, but I hope it kind of serves the purpose of what we're trying to and kind of helps people to kind of take note that, oh, maybe this music isn't just another ambient project. Maybe it's something with a little bit more depth, a little bit more spirituality and purpose.
Do you, what do you love about articulating, you know, faith and, um, kind of soul through music? Because I think like one of the ones I love is I Need Thee Every Hour. I played that a lot, especially when feeling um kind of like as scripture describes, like as the deer pants for the water, so I really
Mm.
thirst for you. And there are times in life when that's like really acute. um what do you find that you love about getting to express that through music?
Um, I think it's just been so I've been a worship leader for kind of the best part of 10 years and recently kind of just stepped down from doing that in a church environment. Um, and I think one of the things that I've enjoyed most about being in the church setting is being able to create spaces. Um, and I think that's something that we really try and do through the music is try and create space because um, worship music, church music is fantastic. It serves a purpose, but sometimes with what you are walking through, the music that you were given on a Sunday when you turn up at church or something like that isn't necessarily something that meets you fully in where you are. And sometimes the kind of moments of lament, the moments of um, just finding that rest with God is something that needs just a little bit more exploration, needs a little bit more time. And it definitely evolved for us. So when we started out, it wasn't that we were just doing ambient Christian music. Um, but that's what kind of, there was kind of this kind of almost like an arch of like trying out different styles and seeing where we landed. If
Yeah.
anybody was to listen back to our early music, they'd be like, oh, this is very different to what they're creating now. But we definitely, with Salt of the Sound, settled in on a kind of, yeah, this is a, it serves a deep purpose to have this time where you can kind of um, just rest, you can be. And music is such a great healer and such a great medium to allow that, I think.
What do you think your philosophy of worship is? I mean, especially being a worship leader for 10 years, and having a lot of different experiences and meeting a lot of different people and also worshiping a lot, in several different settings. What for you, because I know, and one thing that I think I've met a lot of believers who it's hard for them to find worship a worship band, especially, or group that they connect with, because for some believers, it seems like worship, the people who are singing, it's very much like centered on them and on the um, way they're singing. And it doesn't, it feels more like performance as opposed to a worship setting. And I know some,
Hmm.
believers that I've talked to are discouraged by that and are really, it's hard for them to find people that seem to just be a medium for them to worship with God, as opposed to it seem like they're performing and people are, coming alongside and, celebrating in the performance. Um, but what is your philosophy of worship for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard one because so I think I have a few things that I kind of would say to worship teams and say to volunteers and be like, I think, we're striving to do the best that we can do in with the gifts that we've been given. So
Yeah,
you strive towards kind of perfection, but you're not trying to do that as a this needs to be a performance. And I like to use the kind of analogy that when Solomon built the temple for the Lord, he was really focused on the details and he was focused on the perfection of that temple to the point that he made it so ornate with I think it was pomegranates around the very tops of the pillars. And I
yeah,
heard somebody say once that it was the fact that the detail was there above where people could see. It wasn't for people, it was for God. And so I think that is a really good
mm, mm,
place to start to be like, okay, we're trying to do the best that we can do, but that's not for us and that's not for our glory and that's not for our, own gain. That is because that's what we want to bring. And so I like to start with that to kind of say, like, because you get into yeah, people have a lot of opinions about worship,
yeah,
and about churches, and it can be the reason you stay at a church or you go to a different church, kind of what connects with you. And I think that's a great thing of why there are, which makes the kind of, body of churches kind of broad and intriguing and inviting and
yeah.
um, hopefully there's a place for everyone in that. I think, yeah, I would start with that in terms of um, those things. And then I would also say that very much what I tried to do with the teams that I had was um, bring in something. So across weeks, multiple weeks, and multiple worship services, bring in something that would resonate with the people that you're serving. So I've actually served in international churches, both
Mm,
in Sweden. We lived in Sweden, and then in Hong Kong. And you're dealing with different cultures and you're dealing with people who've had like upbringing in kind of all walks of life and all countries around the world. And um, the thing that unites you is often like the fact that these are international churches. So the English language is the uniting factor. You've got people from all kind of um, oh, it's wonderful. It's just like kind of kingdom vision, if you like, in my
yeah,
mind,
yeah,
that you've got these people. And one of the things we loved about our church in Stockholm is there were about 60 or 70 different nationalities and people who were coming from Ghana, Nigeria, who have very different kind of gospel
yeah,
joy, like a depth of joy in how they worship that I've never experienced in um, other cultures. And that's just like, oh, wow, this is a glimpse into kind of how worship um, fills you and meets you. And so trying to take some of that and put it in. And then for other people, it's kind of a lot of people will say, oh, hey, we love having traditional hymns. So we'd always try and do some of those. at various points that were maybe in a different way, in a more contemporary way, but and then different languages as well. That was um, that was a really fun thing that we've done over time. Is kind of the church created its own identity through
Mm.
having these songs that became the church's songs, but they were in Ghanaian Tree language. And everyone knew it. And by the end, you've got all these people from kind of different countries in Europe and everything, all singing in this language that they never knew with English translations. And just, yeah. And it's those things that I think where you kind of touch somebody's kind of home, kind of church experience that's kind of
Yeah.
really resonates with them. And I think in order for, and I say all of that because that's a nice experience, but that has to happen. Like people have to feel a comfort in worship in order to get to the place where they're like, okay, now I'm in a place where I can worship and I can connect
Mm.
with God.
Mm.
And so you have those experiences um and then also creating spaces where people can slow down, take the time, rest, and really just,
Mm.
I probably never achieved it, probably never will, but my role in that space would be to just fade into the background and allow for the Holy Spirit to work, for people to have, like, for me to, the intermediary of worship leader, if you like, to kind of disappear. So it really is kind of people and God. Um, and that would be what I would be, striving to create in a worship experience.
You know, it was interesting you're mentioning a lot of different cultures. It's funny, my husband and I were in Ghana last month, and I mean, the people there and the way they worship is they're very warm-hearted people, and their music is very warm and alive. Um, what culture for you in your different experience has really resonated with you or caused you to have a, really that gave a deep impression?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I don't know if there is a standout. I think we had a lot of friends from Ghana, and that culture and the dancing in church and
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, kind of African conga players and things like that. Were really like, I think that was pivotal in that it was like, here is the joy that I have never experienced in worship. It's not just loud and upbeat. It's like you are bringing next level elements of, wow, this is fun to be doing this. Um, yeah, so I think that is probably maybe the one culture. I think what I've also noticed is how in it it may be a cultural thing, um, although I don't feel like an authority to speak on this, um, that there is a different need in some cultures
Yeah.
for church. So being here in Asia, and in Hong Kong, I think with some people and who've maybe experienced more of an Asian culture throughout their life, the need for church is perhaps a bit different than maybe it was in Europe. Um,
Hmm. Different in
and
what
maybe
way?
yeah, maybe it kind of goes deeper. Um,
Hmm.
maybe there's a kind of more of a seeking, more of a searching,
Hmm.
more of a longing, and a need for questions to be answered, kind of with a greater divinity. Um,
Hmm.
and so I think, but I mean, what I love about all of that, across the spectrum is by experiencing that, by being in those environments, you are learning more about the world. Hopefully, it makes me more of an empathetic person, more of a compassionate person, more of
Yeah.
a kind of a person who says, hey, I actually don't know a lot. Like I can live by my own experience, which is, you know, I grew up in the UK, I've lived in Sweden, I've lived in Hong Kong, and that's my kind of limited view of the world. And it's much broader than that. And people are bringing stuff, there's nuance to kind of people's lived experience, that kind of feeds into spirituality or is a part of how they experience worship.
What led you guys to Hong Kong, you and your husband?
Yeah, so in fact, it was um, well, I came for a job, but so my husband and I, we met at university back in many, many years ago, 15, 16 years ago. Um, and we, at the end of studying music together in Nottingham in the UK, we decided to go traveling to Asia for about 6 weeks over one summer before we
Hmm.
kind of started our proper jobs. You know, I went into being a teacher and he had a job in marketing. And we, where did we go? We landed in Thailand. We did kind of typical kind of student Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and then through southern China, kind of very rural China.
Wow.
And our final stop was Hong Kong. And I don't know if it was kind of having lived in a very kind of rural kind of farms where the electricity went out and after a storm and or being like, we were in like it was the middle of summer, so it was like super warm and we'd be in like these yeah, really remote places that would kind of be like, yeah, there's no electricity after 10, so you're just like sweating at night. And then anyway, we ended up in Hong Kong, which is much more of a city. There's air conditioning. Um, and I think when we so I don't know if it was that part of it or whether it was yeah, there was something about Hong Kong for us, which was we just felt like there was a moment where we kind of were just out and about in the nightlife of Hong Kong and just enjoying it. And we just looked at each other and were like, I think we're supposed to live here one day. And
Oh,
that
wow.
kind of stuck with us. Yeah, it was a bit of a moment where we both kind of looked at each other. And I think one of us said it was like, I had the like same feeling. Anyway, fast forward, we got married. We lived in London for a few years. Then we moved to Sweden because my husband is kind of Swedish, kind of British. He's got dual nationality, and his family all live in Sweden. And so we could move to Sweden. We were like, what a great opportunity. At the same time, we were kind of just starting out with our music, and it was um, it was a great time. We could live there basically for free for a few months while Ben's parents were away. And so we kind of took the leap, gave up our jobs,
Hmm.
um, and it was yeah, it was the next stage. And I went into being a worship leader actually for the church after a few months of being there, alongside kind of building up our music and doing all of that. And then as that came to an end, we were kind of, we took a bit of time and we were seeking and searching what was the next thing. And a series of coincidences, I should say, and kind of, we were looking and being like, well, maybe it's another worship job. So I think I would probably Googled like worship jobs in Hong Kong. But it was really a kind of series of events that
Hmm.
were a little bit out of my control. It was at basically not getting one job in Hong Kong that led to me being put in touch with somebody else who happened to be really good friends with our former bosses, my former
Oh,
bosses
wow.
at the church. And so they knew each other and said, hey, would you work with Anita and Ben again? Because Ben and I had done the worship together in Stockholm. And they said, absolutely in a heartbeat. And so it kind of was a bit of a spiral thing from there, but kind of out of my hands. It wasn't a job I applied for initially. Um, and we brought over to Hong Kong, fell in love with the place again, and have since had both of our children were born in Hong Kong.
So I have to ask because to me, that seems so brave because I love the comfort of, being in Ghana was a gift and seeing another culture was a gift, but I really did miss the comfort and security of my home where I came from. And it was interesting because my husband was loved it, immersed himself in it, and it was very much like, if the Lord called him to go and live there, he would. And I don't think he'd have much trepidation about it. But for me, it was like, I'm okay traveling, but I like to be home, go back to what's familiar and comfortable. And so for you, like, especially, and maybe you're not like this, but you seem like a very soft a tender-hearted person as well as soft-spoken. Do you like does traveling scare you, or do you really just love going to experience different cultures, or like does change cause you to get anxious?
So we love traveling. I think before we had children, we'd traveled to kind of 40 countries together and
Oh
just
wow.
really made that our, like,
Yeah.
we just loved it. Just loved it. And we came to Asia again before we moved here and did some more of it. And again, we were just like, this is just the part of the world that just sets our soul on fire and is just, yeah. Um, but I think it's a really interesting one. So I think for Ben, he had grown up and moved between Sweden and the UK. He was born in Sweden, but then they lived in Nice in France, and then he lived in the UK. And so he had this, and maybe Switzerland for a while, I don't know. And so he'd had this kind of childhood experience of just being in multiple places. And,
Mm.
for his last couple of years at school, he actually stayed in England and his family moved back to Sweden. And so his grandparents were around and so it was for him, it was kind of like he'd never had I would think he would say he'd never had a kind of home
Hmm. Yeah.
country. He
Okay.
wouldn't call one of those particularly like home. Um, for me, all my family lives within like, 25 minutes of each other, and they're all really in Birmingham in the UK. Um, Not quite that close, but yeah, it was a very different thing I was coming from. But I think the fact that we loved to travel and the fact that um, we had the opportunity to move to a different country because Ben was a citizen, um, it was kind of, I think it was a little bit scary, but it was also kind of like, oh, we'll do this for a while, we'll see how it is. Um, and so I think that was the first step. And then Hong Kong was just kind of like, okay, we both really wanted to go here, so let's do this. And it's really funny because in the kind of years in between, we have always kind of said, okay, is this still where we feel called to be, where we should be? Um, and Hong Kong definitely is that. We kind of, even last year, we were kind of, post-COVID. It was a really tough COVID experience in Hong Kong. Um, and we kind of were questioning, we were like, okay, is there somewhere
Hmm.
else? Should we stay here? What should we do? And yeah, we definitely through even exploring different options, we landed on like, yeah, for now, Hong Kong is the place that we feel. I don't know what you would say. I don't know if you would say home or whether you would say like it's just we love it. We love the mesh of culture because it really, really is like you can totally get by speaking English. Like people are the most bilingual I've ever met in my entire life. They have like
Wow.
English and Cantonese, and a lot of people also have Mandarin as well. Cantonese is the local language, and our son is learning that at preschool as well. And and we can't do it. We're really bad. It's a very hard language, but it's just this mesh of cultures. And it's got grit and it's got like beauty and it's got like,
Hmm.
yeah, we love it. I mean, yeah, visit Hong Kong, everyone. I could work for the tourist board, right? It's a great place.
Well, I wanted to ask you, is it hard being a believer in Hong Kong?
Um, no, so I would say there are more international churches here than um when we were in Sweden. Like
Hmm. Wow.
we actually like it's hard to find. There are only a really handful of English speaking churches. And even then there's a lot of it's in Swedish. So excuse me. So um it's yeah, here you have a choice of kind of, what you would call maybe your kind of more mega church, small
Hmm.
scale mega
Wow.
churches through to kind of more local churches and smaller churches. Ours is a kind of small, medium-sized church of like 300 people over two services. So it's not a huge venue, but it's a really nice community. And then if you know. theologically, if you aren't looking for that, there's somewhere else for you. There are some churches that are Chinese churches that now have an English speaking part to them
Wow.
as well. So, I mean, you've got a choice of probably about 15 plus English speaking churches in Hong Kong. And there's complete freedom of religion in Hong Kong as well. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
But that's different from the rest of really Asia in general, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it depends where you go. But
Hmm.
I think there's also, um, yeah, I wouldn't want to speak as an authority on that. I think it depends where you go. There are some countries that are more Muslim. There are some countries that are more Buddhist, especially in Southeast Asia. But I think you can always find international churches across most of those places.
Hmm. And for you, being a mom with young children and raising your kids in Hong Kong, are there any um like did you have trepidation about that at all, or were you very excited to be able to give birth to children and raise them in another country?
Yeah, so our first son, who is just turned 4, we adopted him since we moved to Hong Kong. He's Hong Kong Chinese. And so raising him in Hong Kong makes a lot of sense, especially for these early years. He goes to a preschool where he speaks Cantonese. And we're encouraging that very much so.
Mm,
Um, so that as an adult, he will have the language because what people have said to us in kind of transracial families is that um, when you are an adult, an Asian adult, a Chinese adult, that people expect you to have a language. And we
mm,
have friends who have grown up and they've just got English and they've found that to be a bit of a barrier. And so um, just trying to
mm,
take on board kind of other people's lived experiences and really trying to set Theo up well for his future so that he has both English and Cantonese as really strong languages.
mm.
And our other son, Ethan, is only 1, but we hope that he'll learn Cantonese too, so he and his brother can have some good conversations that we have no idea what's going on.
What led you to adopt your first child?
So when we moved to Hong Kong, actually, we had no children and we were just in a place of kind of seeking and seeing, okay, is this going to happen for us? What's happening? And I think when it didn't happen straight away, we adoption was kind of there. It was kind of straight in front of us to
Mm,
explore. And one of the reasons for that was that we met a lot of people who had adopted. Um, there were several families at the church, including one of the pastors who had adopted in the past.
mm,
So they've got older children now who've grown up. And um, so it was really kind of obvious next step for us to explore. And the local adoption system in Hong Kong, if you are a resident, is very different to kind of international adoption. It's not a kind of money-making venture or
wow.
kind of it doesn't cost a lot of money.
Mm,
It's more of a case of are you a good fit for the child? So you go through and it was a long process. I think it was a year, well, not a long process in the grand scheme of things, but actually it felt like a long process. So we had to wait until we'd lived here for a year before we could even start entering into the adoption process. And then it was another year while we kind of gathered our application, put together our application. And then it was kind of
mm,
6 months to the approval process. And then it happened very quickly for us. We were matched very quickly with our son. Um, and yeah, very perfect match for us. He's great. He's very happy, very curious, lots of hard work, all of those things. Um, but yeah, I think um, it wasn't something either was on my mind when we moved here, but kind of as soon as we got here, it was, yeah, it was there. And so, yeah, we followed through and we're really glad we did.
What um, obstacles or struggles have you experienced being an adopted mom that were different
Mm.
than you expected?
Yeah, I think it's just a whole world of complex. Um, so our son was with a foster family until he was uh almost 2. He came to us and
Mm,
he didn't have any English language when he came to us. He'd just been spoken to in Cantonese. And so like the communication, you learn to communicate very quickly. And yeah, within about 6 weeks, 2 months, he was like English was his thing. He could communicate enough. We all knew what was going on. Um, to the point that English has become his dominant language now, because we speak it all the time at home, obviously. Um, so that was kind of hard because you had this fully formed child, um, and they're not able to communicate
yeah.
in the way that they would like to, in the way that you would like to, all of those things. And I think versus having a newborn. So last year we also had a biological child, who that's a whole nother story. He came very, very early. And so, um, versus a newborn who you look at them and they're helpless and you're just like, okay, this is my job. If he screams, if he cries, if he um, and he did have nights of screaming and crying, you're kind of like, he can't help this. Poor, he's so small, he's so whereas I had to get my head around the expectations of having this child who was kind of fully formed in himself, but maybe not fully formed in the way that he would have been if he'd have lived with us from earlier on.
Right.
And he's also not a baby and has kind of his own like feisty soul, as well. And so it takes time. I was really fortunate in that adoption leave is so like maternity leave is kind of it's well, I suppose similar to the States, it's not very good in Hong Kong. And adoption leave is non-existent, probably in the States too. But my church was really great. They gave me adoption leave that would have been the same,
Oh,
as if
wow.
um, he'd have been a biological child. And so I had 14 weeks with him at home. And then it was kind of extended through working from home because of COVID. Um, so we ended up with kind of like this 6 months being at home together and we went out and did things. But it was actually like so precious and um, like such like the perfect age for it as well because I had 14 weeks with my newborn as well. But you're kind of like, oh, now he's 1. He's kind of like the age where I can start doing stuff with him. At that age, you can't really go out and do fun activities and take them to things. And but actually with Theo, we could do that, and that was really nice because then you're bonding over these things in a really kind of intense in a good way. And so that was really, really nice. But sometimes I think I have to check myself in terms of like the language I use around adoption, right? Um, so one of the things we were told early on is like make sure you use kind of biological parents or birth parents and then adoptive parents. We are Theo's parents, that's fine. But it's really interesting that I've had some people say, well, tell me about his real parents. And I'm like, well, we are his real parents. But if you're talking about his birth parents, then yeah, then we can have that conversation. And so I think a lot of the stuff we actually learned through the process before he came to us, there was really, really good training in the local adoption system here.
Mm.
Really good. It's very informative. You learn a lot. You realize there's a lot more to learn and all of those things. But yeah, it's been like a baptism of fire or something like that. In a, um, yeah, you're kind of thrust into the situation. But it's also just been like that maybe that's a bad metaphor because it's been a wonderful thing. It's been a wonderful thing, but it's been complex and it's been difficult as well.
What you had your biological baby at the same time that he came home, Theo, to you?
So no, so we adopted Theo in. He came home to us in October 2021. Yeah. And then we finalized the adoption the following, it's like 6 months later, so May 2022. And then our biological son arrived last February. So kind of about almost 2 years after Theo came
Okay.
home to us, kind of 18 months to 2 years. Um, but Ethan, our 1 year old, he came very early. He came 12 weeks early. So he
Oh
was
wow.
yeah, I went into labor at 26 weeks and he came at 28 weeks. They managed to keep him in for a little bit longer. And he spent
Wow.
2 months in the ICU in the hospital here before he came home. So that was a whole another another experience. So
It
you
must
have
have
this,
been hard.
yeah, it was tough. Ben and I talk about it and we're kind of like, it was, but I think I've either blanked some of it out or it was also, you do what you've got to do, right? So I had to go to the hospital every day. Um, you kind of trust
Hmm.
yourself to make good decisions. So I actually had a really, really difficult pregnancy. I had the kind of severe morning sickness all the way through. I lost weight throughout the pregnancy.
Hmm.
And everything was fine. He was healthy. And we had the 20-week scan, and it was like, yeah, he's doing really, really well. And then it was about a week after that that kind of stuff started happening and started having contractions, and they didn't really know why, and all of this. And so it was really kind of, I was signed off sick from work to just rest and let my body kind of hopefully do what it needed to do. Um, but yeah, and it was, again, it was like, what was amazing about that experience was, um, as with Theo and the adoption, like there were people who were placed around us. And we just were like, we feel that we should be doing this adoption thing. Like we feel called to do that if you want to use those
Hmm.
words.
Hmm.
And that was very much kind of what happened with Ethan as well. So like a series of things happened that were just kind of like we met some friends who'd just come back to the church. They'd been away at a different church and they'd come back and we got to know them a little bit. And they had 7 years prior had a premature baby at 26 weeks. And one
Wow.
day before any of this kind of kicked off, the mom of the family shared with me kind of their story and all of this. And she was just like, yeah, this is
Wow.
what we had to do. This was the hospital I went to, and this is where I and so she kind of shared with me these details that and then stuff started happening with this pregnancy that I was like, oh, not sure about this. And so she became this source of like knowledge. And she was like, okay, well, if this happens, go to this hospital. This is where you want to be. It's the best hospital, public hospital in
Wow.
Hong Kong. Um, and it just, a lot of kind of things happened, like to the night that Ethan was born, which would have been actually this night 1 year ago because it's his birthday tomorrow. Um, and I was just like, I just need to go. I do something in my body said, hey, not worse. I need to go to the hospital. And he basically arrived 24 hours later. But I was surrounded by
Wow.
the best care public hospital in Hong Kong. So it cost us like virtually nothing. Um, because it gets a bad reputation, but I would just say it was like Hong Kong University is a teaching hospital for them. And the care I received, the care Ethan received, and being in the ICU for 2 months was just like, I just, I just don't even know how to describe it. It was just,
Why does it have a bad
uh,
reputation? Is it because it's public or
yeah, I think it's like oversubscribed. It's very long waiting times for a
okay.
lot of people. So here they have a lot of people have private medical insurance as well. And so it's it's a bit of a thing because obviously it's kind of that's a that's for the wealthy. It kind of often doesn't come with your job. It's not attached to jobs and things like that. So most people
Hmm.
use the public system, but
Okay.
and there's a kind of fear around it, like, oh, and we were still in the stage where we were like, okay, I had a private OBGYN and I was like, okay, do we go fully private to give birth? Because you hear these horror stories about like the public health system and it just wasn't my experience. My experience was like, oh wow, these
Right.
people saved my life. They saved my baby's life. They took great care of us. And I just, yeah. But I
Hmm.
also can't help but think that some of it was like this series. I don't know how, people talk about this differently, but series of coincidences, um, God's hand at work for sure. Um, but just me being able to just know, okay, this is the moment that I need to make this decision.
Hmm.
Um, and uh, just, it was, we live on an island that is accessible by one road. Um, and it was like 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and it was the middle of COVID because COVID lasted longer here, or the restrictions did. And so it was like, how do I get to this hospital? Which is, if the ambulance comes, they won't take me to this hospital and I won't be able to get transferred. It was a whole thing. Anyway, all of that to say, like, there just happened to be a taxi outside, like in the middle of the night. And I looked
Wow.
out, like, even last night, I looked out. There were no taxis at 3 o'clock in the morning when I was up with my 1 year old who was you know, doing what 1 year olds do in the middle of the night. And that was in place. Um, they were just, I'd had this advice from these people who'd been kind of placed in my life at this just at this time, who had been through this themselves.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, there was a whole host of things that, but I just love that our boys share the fact that they were both born in Hong Kong. Um, so they have these similar but yet so different experiences. And what unites us as a family is not all of our biology, but I'm excited to see how we grow together.
Hmm. How did the Lord encourage? I mean, did that encourage your faith? That must have been such a booster to think about the ways the Lord provided for you. So now, I mean, obviously, we're all sinners, we're not perfect. And so even if God shows himself faithful, we can doubt again and be like, I'm not quite sure. But I mean, for you, was that like just such an encouragement to see the way that he nurtured and provided for you in that moment?
Yeah, I think so. And I just think with all of these experiences, you just kind of have to sit back and go, okay, there's something in this. I've learned something here. Or what is there to learn from this? What has God taught me through this? And I think one of the things I would say is the song Goodness of God is a song that I've struggled to sing because especially when we were kind of going through kind of harder times, um, kind of not sure where we were being led in terms of our family, and what was happening, and with, Ethan being in the hospital, um, and
Hmm.
things with the adoption not necessarily coming quickly. So many unknowns. And it's kind of like, we sing, um, all my life you've been faithful, all my life you've been so, so good. Um, but it's really hard. And I realized in church settings, it was really hard for some people to sing that. And so on my last Sunday at the church that I was serving at, I wanted to sing that song, and I prefaced it by saying, "Hey, we sing this song not because we're expecting like God to pour out this prosperity gospel and everything's going to be great because we turn to Him. It's not this kind of genie in a bottle, um, kind of here are my wishes, God, grant them, please." It's a It's a Psalm 23 song, which is the Lord is my shepherd, and And we often say the first couple of verses of that, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, he makes me lie down. And it kind of tails off. But it's the verses at the end that say, surely your goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Hmm.
And it doesn't mean like, that psalm is about, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, but God's goodness is with me.
Oh.
And
Mm.
and I said that, and I mean, I can't count on my hands the number of people who came up to me and said, "Thank you for saying that. I've struggled with this song. Thank you for saying that. This is
Mm.
because I don't feel that that's what I was hearing from church or hearing from kind of worship leaders or whatever." And so, yeah, that's kind of struck with me, the kind of
Hmm. Yeah.
just as I'm kind of coming to the end of that season of worship leading, that I've just really like meeting people, and that's what I feel like God has been saying to me in this next season, like, hey, go in to people and like be a blessing to them, like tell them, like I had a we have some great friends in Sweden who are an older couple. They're in their kind of mid 70s, and they used to say to us um, that they were in a God bless you ministry. And every Sunday they would come up to whoever did like scripture readings or prayers or like the worship team and the volunteers and whatever, and they would be like so meaningfully they would say like just thank you for what you've done, but not just thank you for what you've done. Like they would pick something out and be able to kind of encourage that person. And I want to go into like an encouragement ministry whereby I'm kind of hearing where people are at, seeing where people are at, like looking for the people who need encouragement. Like, how is God going to use me as a vessel to speak to these people who might need to hear this today? And so that was a long way of saying um, whatever the first question was to that. But I think, yeah, all of these experiences, like, they go deeper if we allow God to, if we listen to God.
Well, Anita, I want to thank you so much for your time, and listeners again. I'm going to have a link to their website, but I do encourage you to listen to their music because it's very comforting, and it does allow, like Anita said, for that space to worship with the Lord and to be real with Him, whether it be good times you're going through where it's easier to say, like Anita was saying, goodness of God, or the harder times when it's relying on His character and not what you see to be able to say that. Um, but Anita, thank you so much. You've encouraged me, and so I really appreciate your
Mm.
time.
Oh, thank you so much. I think, yeah, I'm looking forward to exploring because like we just recently connected to exploring the other guests you've had on because this has been touching for my soul. So I'm just, yeah, thank you for what you're doing in your ministry and be encouraged that I think there's an important place for this.